Hello, and you're very welcome to yet another episode of The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan. It is Friday, the 26th of January, 2024, and it's been a very busy week, so much so that we've loads to talk about. We're going to talk about the RTE's plan in conjunction with the government to put €15 on people's broadband bills, a plan that lasted, I think, Sarah, 3 days before it was dropped. We'll come to that at the end of the episode. We're also going to talk about Elon Musk talking to Gript this week, and we're going to talk about the proposal for a COVID inquiry, amongst other things, that will not assign blame to anybody in Ireland for anything that happened. But first, and before I ask Sarah how she was, I want to share a secret with you, which is that when we're recording this podcast, usually Sarah and I have a conversation earlier on in the day that goes through, what will we talk about? And she mentioned that she wants to talk about the Oscars and the controversy over the Barbie movie not getting sufficient nominations. And Sarah, I wish I had recorded you. I have never heard you F and blind as much in my life. And I think we'd triple our listenership if we could just play that clip. But before you give us a reprise, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm glad those storms are over.
Yeah, they were quite unpleasant. I think I mentioned on the podcast last week that I enjoyed the cold weather because I walked the dog twice a day. This week was dog walking was less pleasant, put it that way.
Yeah, I think it was some of the hardest wind I've ever felt in my current house here. Anyway, and it felt like the roof was going to lift off.
Anyway, we had no power cuts down here, which was amazing because normally as soon as somebody blows a fan 3 villages over in their house, our power goes out. So I don't know what happened on this occasion. We were just very lucky. The Oscars. There's been a controversy this week, and for those who don't know, the controversy is that there's a movie called Barbie, which got an Oscar nomination, but Sarah, the wrong people got nominated.
Yeah, the wrong people got nominated. Okay, so where should I begin on this? Okay, so
take it away. Just say what you said to me on the phone earlier on today.
Go mental. Well, I'm not allowed F and blind as much. I was so annoyed earlier on. Okay, so it's a perfect storm of absolute nonsense in my opinion, right? So Barbie is a film which basically is about something ultimately obviously based on a famous doll that feminists would have been going mental about a few years ago, but now because in the movie she gives a couple of sad speeches about how hard it is to be a woman, it's suddenly some kind of pillar for the female experience.
That's what I've always wondered. I'm going to interrupt you. Is Barbie fundamentally not, and I know it's a doll for kids, but in terms of her design, is she not fundamentally like a hypersexualized version of what a woman should look like?
Well, that was always the case, but that's my point, and this is that's kind of part of the annoyance about this whole storm about the Oscars, that I feel like a lot of people, the Barbie makes a speech about how hard it is to be a girl, or you have to be this and you have to be that, and then bring on the dumb. Then everyone's manipulated into thinking that Barbie is suddenly a feminist icon, when it's really just a marketing team who sat around and tried to figure out how to trick you dum-dums into thinking that she's something that she wasn't 2 years ago, and you fell for it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, so Barbie was nominated for an Oscar. All my feeds, my social media feed was full of women going absolutely ballistic that Ken got a nomination for an Oscar, but Barbie didn't. First of all, right, I have to take a deep breath for starters, right? Frankly, and I've only seen clips of the film, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say neither of them deserve an Oscar. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense, right? But even if they did, like the victimhood and the nonsense that people went on with this week about Barbie not being first of all, can I just say, and I opened it up here because I actually like him a lot. Leonardo DiCaprio was an actor for like 20 years minimum. He got nominated for What's Eating Gilbert Grape, The Aviator, Blood Diamond, Wolf of Wall Street, Inception. He should have been probably nominated for an Academy Award, in my opinion, for The Departed, but he did not win until The Revenant in 2016. He was nominated multiple times and he didn't win. And he didn't sit around cribbing and whinging and whining about what a victim he was because he didn't get nominated. He just got on with it, and eventually he won an Oscar. So all you hear all week is this crap about, this is exactly example of the patriarchy because the boy got the fake golden statue and we didn't, and it's not fair, and it just shows that, oh God, honest to God. I looked it up earlier on because I was like, you hear all this about feminism and women and how we're put upon or whatever. Like, I wonder, like, if you think about what's going on in the world right now, right? It's an absolute shrieking, pardon the pun, shrill, shrieking demonstration of your absolute privilege and entitlement that you think that that's the feminist issue of this week. Well, as we speak right now, there's about 3 million girls worldwide who are at risk of female genital mutilation. What about the women in Gaza? How about the women who are taken hostage? Mass. How are they all getting on? I bet you none of them give a shit about Barbie and an Oscar. These women need to go outside, take a walk, have a talk with themselves and get an adult grip of themselves about what's important in the world. Barbie, are you joking? Is this like, honestly, God, just flood it again. Just flood it again at this point, because I think I might transition into a man because I don't want to be associated with this absolute entitled, woke shite that they're all going on with about Barbie. And Hillary Clinton came out and said, girls, don't be upset about Barbie not getting nominated. It's okay. Like, am I on the Truman Show? Like, is this a joke? Is somebody setting me up? Barbie. Like, do you know what I mean? Next week we'll have Mike Tyson on to talk about how to formulate a loving relationship. Are you guys for real? Like, they've just completely lost their minds. I think the world has just lost their mind. Barbie is just the last straw for me. Stupid movies that are not worthy. Like, think about people like who've won Oscar, like Academy or Oscars in the past for acting. It's about acting. It's about somebody telling a story through their art that makes a profound statement about who we are and what we should be or whatever, something. It's not about driving the latest woke agenda. By the way, and it's not even doing that. It was just dreamed up by a marketing team who wanted to rebrand Barbie into something different because what she used to be, which is TNA and a doll that, supposedly at one point was showing a horrific body image for women. Now she's going to be an icon because that's what's more trendy today. Like, this is about that, and the girls all fall for it. They go on their social medias and they put down they're avocado and scrambled eggs, and they talk about how put upon they are this week by Barbie not getting awarded an Oscar. Get a grip. Honestly, it's time to adult up. Leave your 8-year-old feelings behind and just get a human grip of yourself and find something worthwhile to talk about if you want to talk about stuff with women, because this isn't it. Sorry, I tried. I don't think I'd said the F word at all that time.
No, you didn't. But I mean, if I was a woman, and I am not, thank heavens. But if I was, I'd be more annoyed at the fact that Judi Dench has received, I think, 7 nominations for an Academy Award and only won once than I would be with Margot Robbie. Yeah, Judi Dench is
but Margot Robbie was very good in The Wolf of Wall Street. It's perfect. You're all being conned. It's set up to be this thing where, if she wins, it's a win for women, and if she loses, it's an example of the patriarchy. It's none of it. It's just a stupid film about a doll.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Did you watch the film?
No, I literally went on and searched clips of it so that I could see the main, because I didn't want to be speaking kind of completely so she gives, America Ferrera, I think is the actress's name, and she gives a speech about this thing about how hard it is to be a woman because you can be pretty but not too pretty, and you can be skinny but you have to pretend you don't want to. And yeah, all those things are true, but so what? It goes back to my point about Leonardo DiCaprio. Imagine if Leonardo DiCaprio, when he didn't win in 2007 and 2005 and 1994 and whatever, time after time after time getting nominated, came out and said, this is because I'm X, or it's just a victim. It's a culture that's just addicted to victimhood. Sometimes you don't win because you just weren't as good as the other person. Sometimes life's not all about you, and you know what I mean? And maybe you're not entitled to feel outraged that you didn't win about a stupid film about a doll.
But the funny thing for me about that sort of speech you're talking about, where to be a woman you have to be thin but not too thin, and you have to, starve yourself but pretend you love food and all that kind of nonsense. It's not
but John, most of the time for who? For other women.
Yes, but also it's only to be a certain kind of woman.
Yeah.
It's only if you want to be an influencer or an actress or have the right kind of men falling at your feet. It's not true of most women.
But
I
also,
don't think I'm not a man. I'm a man. Sorry, I'm a man, but I don't think that's true of most women at all. It's a self. It's this is what you have to do if you want to be in the top 1% of Instagram influencers, and that is kind of taken as this is how hard it is to be a woman. No, it's not.
but
Be like me saying it's really hard to be The Rock.
yeah, but it's also kind of like it's such a limited view. There is this thing of like you have to be pretty or stupid and you can't be both and whatever. Just like what I'd love to hear a bit more about is the women who just keep on keeping on. Like an example that never really makes doesn't get talked about that much. It gets talked about a little bit, but not as much. Is like George Clooney was the most eligible bachelor probably in the world, right? And I love that George Clooney married. She's very beautiful, but like a very, very, very established human rights lawyer. I love that for him. That was amazing. Good for him. Like he could have had anyone, and he selected a really intelligent, really successful woman or whatever. Like there's loads of women who just get on with their lives. They don't feel like victims. They go out, they become a lawyer. They're probably subjected to some sexism. They go, okay, they get on with it, and they marry George Clooney. Like good for them. I'd love to hear more about that. Like, not everything is a demonstration of how the world wants to, kill you or or take more, or earn more money than you or whatever. And, I've said this before on the podcast. Like, I think you succumb to an addiction to victimhood, and you see the world through that prism in every single thing you do, whether it's when you walk down the street and someone says, you're looking well, to when Barbie doesn't get an Oscar. If you see everything through the prism of that victimhood, well, first of all, you're signing up to be miserable. And second of all, it's not true. That's not true. Like, not everybody is against you. Not everything is sexist. Not everything is the patriarchy. It's not been my experience as a 40-year-old woman. Of course, there's bad everywhere, and there's this and there's that, whatever. But I don't want to go around. I don't want to raise my daughter to be like, now, you see, when you're in school, they're going to treat you different. And you see, when you don't get the promotion, it's because you're a woman. And you see, when that man looks at you that way, it's because he wants to murder you. And you see this. No, I don't want to raise my daughter like that. I don't think that's the reality of the world.
No. I'll be honest. I didn't pay as much attention to this week as you did, because I just kind of tune it out. I find it to be a kind of low, permanent drone in the background of the global conversation, sort of the whinging of middle class liberal women.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if that makes me sound like a misogynist, but it's constant.
But I am a woman, so I like, and I'm saying I find it like that, and that's my point about. I can't remember George Clooney's wife's name, but like that's my example.
I know her first name is
Amal Clooney, and there's a woman, like, there's no droning there. She's just getting on with, like, loads of women are really successful and have done really well for themselves. And this drone of, like, do you know what I mean? Like, Mal Clooney doesn't care about Barbie because she's got bigger things. She's a human rights lawyer who, as I said, is probably out, I don't know what her cases are about, but, like, out there talking about things like female genital mutilation, as I said, 3 million people. Why is that not important? And this is the other thing, John, and I did say this on my rant to you on the phone earlier on. I guarantee you, next week, when the 6'2" hairy man wants to wear a bad wig and a G-string in the local changing room, these women will all be silent. But Barbie is the female issue of our time. Yeah, sure, girls, get a grip.
I was taken, and I was reading the Irish Times today, as I read every day. So I'm an Irish Times reader, Sarah, every day without fail. And they do this thing every week called the Women's Podcast. Now, I don't listen to it, but they do a written summary of it. And this week's interview is with an author called Kathy Sweeney, who's written a book called Breakdown. And apparently it got a really good review on the Irish Times Women's Podcast. And the sort of basic plot of this book is a middle-class, middle-aged Dublin woman, not dissimilar to yourself, who just one day decides she's had enough and gets in her car and drives to the ferry port.
I love that my rant today has reminded you of this plot. Go on.
Yes. She drives down to Rosslare, she gets on a ferry, and she never looks back. She just leaves her husband and her kids behind and goes off and lives a whole new life. And apparently this is a tale of female empowerment. I was thinking, no, it's not. That person is a villain. You don't just abandon your husband and kids, wherever with your husband.
All the men who've ever done that are definitely considered villains.
They are. If a man did that, he wouldn't be considered to be empowered. But apparently, this is a kind of a fantasy of female empowerment. But if a man did that, you'd be considered a disgrace, rightly so. Anyway, we need to talk about other things on this podcast, and I want to talk about something that annoyed me.
Go.
But didn't annoy me. It amused me, because there's just no point getting amused anymore. Which is that we are going to spend a lot of money, Sarah, in this country on a COVID inquiry. It has been announced today. We're going to get to the bottom of everything, but it's going to be on a no blame basis.
Oh, I laughed. I literally laughed aloud when I said no blame. That is the funniest thing I've read in a while. They're not intending to be funny, but it's so funny. What on earth is the point of having a tribunal that has a purpose of no blame? What's the point of the tribunal then?
I mean, it strikes me that the problem when you say there'd be no blame is that the findings of the tribunal are already fixed, because if you can't blame anybody for problems, then you can't really identify that there were problems. Because if you identify that there were problems and you identify no blame, then everyone else will try and find the person who's to blame, and they will be blamed. So it's got to be a kind of the outcome of the inquiry, if it's no blame, has got to be, well, everything was done perfect, but there's a few things we could have done a little bit better. That's the most you can say, because if you go down the road of there being no blame, that means there's no accountability, and if you can't assign accountability, then it's really difficult to even go down the road of saying, well, this was done wrong. Because if you say,
then I'd go further, is that you and I could write the review, we could write the report of that tribunal now. Now.
Definitely write the executive summary. The first 12 paragraphs, mark this down, listeners. The first 10 to 12, 13 paragraphs of the executive summary of this review when it comes out will be about what a wonderful job Ireland did in comparison to other countries. They'll use the most cherry-picked stats they can, but that will be, and Ireland was wonderfully successful by comparison to peer countries and blah, blah, blah. That will be the conclusion, and that will be what RTE News report. And the no blame thing, I mean, it's just a fascinating mindset. And I mean, they will officially justify it. Their official justification will be, well, if you start blaming people, then people might be cautious in the next crisis in case they get blamed. But yes, that is the objective. The objective here is that if you are given, and people forget this, the Irish government took emergency powers during the referendum, during the pandemic. They took emergency powers to enable them effectively to suspend people's civil liberties. And now they are afraid that it might be uncovered that those powers were abused or not used in the way that they should have been. And they think this is a bad thing, because in case the next time they need to take emergency powers, people might start looking over their shoulder. I'm sorry, but in a democracy, we should always want people in power, particularly those with emergency powers, looking over their shoulder in a little bit of fear that, if they abuse these powers, there might be, or if they're incompetent, there might actually be some consequences for them down the line. Whereas our government is setting the precedent that you can effectively be the person who makes a decision, for argument's sake, wrongly, to shutter old people in nursing homes at the height of the pandemic, and start moving sick patients back into nursing homes, which could theoretically have resulted in loads and loads of deaths early in the pandemic. And no one is going to hold you to account for that, because we have a no blame culture. I'm sorry. If you did that at any other element of the public service, if a similar catastrophe unfolded in the health service in normal times, there definitely wouldn't be no blame. It is a joke. It's a joke. And I mean, people should be angry about it. Not about what happened in the pandemic, not even about the potential findings of the inquiry. They should be angry that the government is so concerned with self-preservation for themselves and for civil servants that they will preactively pardon everybody of any offence they may have committed. It's a joke. That's what I think.
But, and also, I mean, and we've had comments on this podcast from people who were, if memory serves, a little bit upset with me anyway for being going a bit easy on the government in terms of their COVID responses in, like, I think particularly in the first lockdown or whatever, I don't blame them for what, for the decisions they made. So I'm not completely predisposed to the idea that everything they did was wrong, is what I'm saying. But what I have huge issue with is the cost of a kind of a carnival of nonsense to say it was done to tick a box because England did it and now we better do it too. That has a pre-decided outcome and is a complete waste of money.
Well, I know what the title of our podcast is going to be. This week's going to be Carnival of Nonsense. That's a very good way of describing it. I mean,
well, bring in, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like I say about like these kind of things, like the circus never travels alone. So like this will be a carnival of person after person of nonsense, wasting time, wasting money for something that you and I could write right now. Like, don't bother doing it. And like, also the lack of self-awareness to come out and say the approach will be no blame. That everybody accepts that you know, that washes. Think of previous tribunals that have happened in this country and imagine somebody had come out and said the approach we're going to take is no blame. What's the point?
Yeah, well, this isn't even going to rise the level of tribunal. And it's yet to be revealed whether there will even be public hearings or whether it'll be a behind closed doors exercise with a report published at a later date.
Oh, I mean, like,
or who is going to be conducting it? Whether some big four consultancy firm is going to get a nice contract to write a report. I mean, it's just so depressing. I mean, because one of the things that we're not going to do in this country, and I think we have determined, I haven't determined, but as a society we have determined that we're not going to do, is wrestle or come to terms with the negative impacts. So we have at the moment, and this is just a statement of fact, we have one of the most elevated rates of excess deaths in Western Europe. There's still people dying at a rate statistically higher than they were before the pandemic. Now, there are people who listen to this podcast who are convinced that there are pharmaceutical reasons for that. I'm not convinced of that, but I am convinced that, you know, when you shut down...
What do you think is the reason? Or do you have it?
I think when you shut down, for example, cancer screening for basically 2 years, you're going to have people whose cancers would otherwise have been detected at an earlier stage that will not then be detected to they're at stage 3, stage 4, stage whatever. We're going to lose their lives. I'm aware of at least 2 cases of elderly people I know who died after the lockdown was over, for whom I would say the COVID lockdowns were devastating in their impact.
Yeah.
Devastating in their impact on them in terms of a lack of socialization. In one case, definitely a lack of going to the doctor, where something that was very serious was not caught and could have been caught and was caught earlier on. I am aware in the part of rural Ireland where I live of elderly people who have, you know, never really gotten back into socializing. I think if you talk to any Catholic priest in the country, particularly in rural parishes, they'll say that church attendance has never recovered. There are still old people who don't go out. There were devastating impacts on people's quality of life that were inflicted by the government.
And there was
for a very questionable return.
Yeah, there was weird things. Like one thing I remember being really staggered by in my personal experience was, so I, as you know, had my daughter Olivia in March of 2022. So it was obviously kind of after COVID, but still like some visitor restrictions in Holles Street and stuff like that. And she was premature by roughly around 6 weeks, five and a bit. And she was in the NICU in Holles Street for a week and a half. And I was up and down and in and out of the NICU. And I was chatting to one of the nurses one day. And I said, like, this must have been a really strange place during COVID, like when there was a lockdown. Because like in this situation, because some of the restrictions had been lifted, myself and Keith were able to go to the NICU. But before, it wouldn't have been like that at all. Like it would have been Keith wouldn't have even, he would have been allowed maybe be there for the birth and then that was kind of it, or 1 hour, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I said, oh, it must have been so strange, like to have all these babies here with nobody, you know, nobody able to come up or only one person able to come up or whatever. And the midwife or the nurse who worked in the NICU said to me, oh yeah, but sure, like we didn't have half as many babies here during COVID lockdowns. And I was like, well, like why though? Because like surely everyone was still having babies. And she said, yeah, but in COVID lockdowns, women who a lot of the time, a huge amount of the time, like women who go into premature labor and have a premature baby go in because they're stressed, for whatever reason, and because everyone was in lockdown and they stayed at home, they didn't, so there wasn't that many babies here. And like, obviously that's a good thing in a way. But my point is that, like, there was all these weird consequences of things you wouldn't even think of, things that wouldn't even occur to you. Like, some, in that sense, okay, I suppose it's better that more women didn't go into premature labor. But, like, we've never really had a real conversation about the consequences of things, like the real consequences. There was some talk of elevated domestic violence and things like really poor outcome or experiences for children who are left at home for long periods of time in bad situations. But we never really had an honest conversation about what the human impact of this was outside of the obvious things. Do you know what I mean?
I sorry you say that. I'm thinking of education. I mean, because my wife busted her ass trying to teach classes from home over the internet, which was incredibly difficult. Because, if a student is slacking, there's nothing you can do if they're just like not tuning into a Zoom meeting. What can you do?
Yeah.
But also there were, fair is fair. There were undoubtedly other students who wanted to work who had teachers who weren't working as hard as my wife was.
Yeah.
And people's education standards suffered. Ever since COVID, and they quite openly said they dumbed down the Leaving Cert and the Junior Cert during COVID. They've continued to do so. So it's had a permanent impact on the quality of education and exams in the country.
Yeah.
And a lot of these impacts won't be felt for another 5-10 years. So to say that we're going to have a sort of no blame general inquiry, which won't even touch on the long lasting impacts of this thing, it just says to me that we have a political class who are determined to pretend the whole thing never happened. And what did happen was great. And aren't we the best boys in Europe? And didn't we all do well? Clap ourselves in the back. Isn't Ireland great? Not like those Brits.
But then at least have the balls to say we're not going to have an inquiry.
Anyway,
we're not going to spend the money on that. Thanks.
Well, we are, and we'll cover it on this podcast as it's going on for the next while. Anyway, it's a busy week, and there's lots more stuff to talk about, including the referendums and the referendum commission. But before we get into that, you wanted to mention the case of a woman in the UK who committed some thought crime and was finally acquitted for it this week.
Yeah. So. Well, she won her tribunal over, she took a case. So basically, it's interesting for people who listen to our podcast because it's kind of another one in a series of cases, tribunals, unfair dismissal acts that are being taken by people who've been fired for having what I would call gender critical views, right? So,
and for those who don't know, gender critical views means that you believe there are two sexes. Women have vaginas, men have penises, and that's it. That's the end of the story, right? Fair summary of gender. Yeah, fair enough.
Controversial. So Jo Phoenix, the professor, she was a professor of criminology, and she has won an unfair dismissal claim against the Open University. And so she is a lesbian. She set up the Gender Critical Research Network at the Open University, and basically she was dismissed. She was referred to by her employer as the racist uncle at the Christmas table. And basically this week, the tribunal has found that the racist uncle comment had been made. It amounted to harassment. And it was all based on the fact that Jo Phoenix had signed a letter in the Sunday Times that basically, expressed her gender critical beliefs. And it was basically a witch hunt, and she basically was told off for expressing these beliefs. She was likened to a racist, and she's won her claim. And there's been a series of these claims, and I think it's of these kind of wins. And I think it's really interesting because I think it's showing a bit of a shift in the kind of, just a very slight shift. I mean, there's a lot of people who've lost their jobs but it's just a slight shift in that when it actually comes down to it, you can't fire people for having these views. Not yet, anyway.
Well, in the UK.
Within the UK. But, I would be cautiously optimistic that would follow here eventually. Now, notwithstanding the proposed hate speech laws that we're talking about implementing and all that. But, it's put it this way. It's a slight comfort, like these people's career, she's won her unfair dismissal. A tribunal has found that she was unfairly dismissed for expressing these views, and I think that that's a win. That's a positive thing. The world hasn't gone fully mad.
Yeah, except I keep coming back to this in the UK business, because I think that one of the most pernicious aspects of Irish culture, when I say Irish culture, I mean sort of the attitudes of Irish elites, is this kind of like this vision of the UK as everything we shouldn't be. And the fact that the women in the UK are winning these cases actually makes me fearful for women in Ireland who express these views. Because as you mentioned, the hate speech bill there, the hate speech bill includes, obviously, if it's not on the statute books yet, thank God, but should it ever get onto the statute books, it includes protection for gender identity as one of the grounds, one of the protected characteristics you may not offend. And the only reasonable interpretation of that is that if my gender identity is that I decide tomorrow that I'm Joanna, a woman, and you say to me, no, you're John, a man, you have a dick, you're a man, then I can sue you for or seek your prosecution on grounds of hate speech.
Yeah.
Because you will have offended, you'll have spoken hatefully against my gender identity. So I'm not as cheered by you about the fact that these things are developing in the UK, knowing what I do about this country's attitude to developments in the UK generally. I think we are still miles behind. I mean, there are groups out there like the Countess who are doing phenomenal work in this area, and we've had Leisha de Bruno on the show, obviously. But I think we're still miles behind having kind of an organized movement to combat it. So I'm still very worried, and I don't think. And here's where I'll kind of segue into referendum discussion. I think it's a huge mistake to remove the word "women" from the Constitution.
I agree.
Because it's so important that the Constitution recognizes that there are two genders. And if you take that out, I mean, we had, and people forget that in this country, less than 18 months ago, we had Regina Doherty, who was then serving as the leader of Shannon Éireann, go to a Scottish Parliament and announce that there are at least, not only, at least 9 genders that we recognise. 9. Now, I don't know where they're recognised in Irish law, but Regina Doherty insists that there are at least 9 now that we recognise. This stuff is still deeply embedded. I mean, I saw Mark Tighe and others have worked.
Do you think that Regina Doherty, for example, when she goes home to bed that night and puts her head down in the pillow, do you think she believes that? Or do you think some woke, like researcher in her department or wherever it was at the time, printed off a load of stuff and she just read it out?
I think Regina Doherty is a kind of politician who's existed in this country for all of time, in that whatever the national orthodoxy is, she will hew to it as closely as she possibly can. It would not surprise me were one to transport Regina Doherty back in time to somewhere around 1950 and give her a broad sense of the lie of the land and put her in the exact same position. It would not surprise me were she start giving speeches about the dangers of illegitimacy and bastard children.
Oh, I mean, 100%. And there's the amount of politicians and journalists today that I often think about their kind of, their secular blasphemy. In other words, that they look back and go, do you remember those terrible times when people, they'd decide that this woman had done something immoral and they'd cast her out because she didn't adhere to the Catholic principles. Now, who are we going to cancel today who's not adhering to our new woke principles? It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
The journalists, I'm not going to personalize it, but there's a couple of them in particular that I think you're just the Sister Mary whatever of the year. The thing you talk about despising, the thing you actively feel so morally superior to, you're it. That's you. You're let's cancel Kevin Myers and let's cancel this person because they've deigned to not follow this very well thought out ideological script that we've decided they should stick to. And if they don't stick to our rules and our script and our book, we get rid of them. We excommunicate them. I mean, come on.
There's a certain emptiness to it. It goes back to your rant at the opening of the show about Barbie, and you mentioned Hillary Clinton's tweet. And when you mentioned Hillary Clinton's tweet, I was just thinking, I bet all the money in my pocket right now, which is more than €5 and less than 50, but that Hillary Clinton has never seen the Barbie movie. I would nearly bet my house on it. But you know,
Also, but also, John, the other thing is, it's the shameless hypocrisy. Like, if you go back, you don't even have to go back multiple generations and pick different people and compare Hillary to them. Hillary is a woman who stood up when women made accusations about her husband and ridiculed those women publicly. Mm-hmm. Barbie is the least of her feminist problems.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, but they all forget. They all forget because as long as you follow the new script, you're one of us.
Mm-hmm.
You better believe that if there was a Republican president, they'd be digging up things that his wife had said long years ago and applying it to today and using it. But they all conveniently forget everything Hillary did in the past.
Well, I remember her in 1993 saying, because the first time I ever heard of Tammy Wynette was when Hillary Clinton said that she wasn't going to be like Tammy Wynette standing by her man. And then she made Tammy Wynette look like a trollop with the degree of loyalty she displayed to her husband when it was obvious that he didn't deserve it. So yeah.
She also women who had made accusations about her husband, she publicly annihilated those women. And I'm sorry, but you know, it's just a good example of how we conveniently forget people. As long as they're in tune with the new agenda and they step into line with everything today, it doesn't matter what they did in the past.
Yes. Exactly, and I think Regina Doherty is obviously she hasn't, to my knowledge, vilified any women or anything like that, but I think she's in a similar space. Anyway, she says there's 9 genders now. The government, Ben Scallon has infamously asked on a number of occasions how many genders there are. He's never yet gotten a straight answer out of any government minister.
Or what a woman, or what is a woman.
Or what is a woman, or any of this sort of stuff. And now we're removing the word women from the Constitution. And yeah, so I'm not as optimistic as you are. I think this is going one direction in the UK, but the pendulum is still swinging in the other direction here. And we have a live legal threat that it may soon be hateful to say the honest biological truth, which is that there are 2 sexes, 2 genders. There's no real difference between them. Gender identity is a myth. You know, I read a very powerful quote this week from somebody who had transitioned or attempted transition in the UK. And then decided that they weren't going to do it, where he basically said, look, for me, he's speaking personally, he wasn't speaking for everybody, he said, look, this was a form of mental illness, and I was trying to kill myself without dying.
Oh, I saw this. Oh, yeah, so sad.
But I thought it was a very powerful phrase to describe what transitioning is, the destruction of your former self without dying. And it's not a coincidence, I think, that it comes with so many physically harmful and physically destructive things, like getting bits of yourself chopped off and so on and so forth. So anyway, we're not going to talk about transgenderism at length, but yeah, I think it's very powerful, but I also think it is an issue that's connected to these referendums, because we're being asked to redefine the family, redefine the word woman, and the Electoral Commission, Sarah, who are responsible for sort of the truth and establishing what is fact, were asked today
being unbiased. You know, they don't have a position, right?
Apparently so. They were asked today about this phrase that's going into the Constitution, other durable relationships, and they're asked, what does it mean? And the answer was fascinating, in that they basically said that it could mean something like, you have a durable relationship if you get a Christmas card together as a couple, or if you get invited to things. That will prove that you're together. You're seen as being together. You know, your relationship is recognized. That could be what the courts talk about. But
so, like an interview for a green card, like.
Yeah, I am emphasizing the word "could," because that's what they said. Could be. I mean, they don't know. The Electoral Commission doesn't seem to know exactly what it means. They didn't say this will be what it is. This is what it means. They said this is how it could be interpreted by the courts. This is one possible way. And it just strikes me the irresponsibility of the government sticking something into the Constitution that they can't define, and that the Electoral Commission, which is headed by a judge, can't certainly define. And the fact that there seems to be, Progressive Ireland seems to have decided that, well, the Constitution needs to change, and the NGOs have been pushing for this change for a long time, and we don't know if it'll pass, but we better line up behind it. And no one is stopping to say about the irresponsibility of the government inserting something into the Constitution that they cannot define. They can't actually tell you what it means. It's just better than whatever old Catholic guff is in there now. It'd be laughable if it wasn't so serious.
It's also so regressive, really, because, like as human beings, we have like evolved over hundreds of millions of years or whatever, and millions. But um, we, we have organized ourselves in certain ways and put structures around things that are inherently difficult to define. And one of them is relationships. Like, we're both like nearly the same age. Like the relationships are complicated. I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast has aware, whether it's been themselves or someone they know who's been in a relationship, or one person in the relationship thinks it's a lot more serious than the other, and so on and so forth. And so the structure that we put around that to establish whether or not something was one way or the other was marriage. That's the idea behind it, is to put a kind of a legal framework around something so that it can be understood, so that it can be defined, so that it can be, so that one relationship can be compared or not compared to another. And this theoretically opens that all up again. And I saw a guy, a podcaster, it was a kind of a video a while ago of this guy, and I can't remember who he was, but he was ranting it. And it was really funny, but like, not funny, haha, but he was ranting and raving about how furious he is that human beings who were, that there was this line of progress, like if you go back to like with different revolutions and different periods in human the history of humankind, and people have, there's been this progress, and then in the last like 30 or in the last 100 years, there's been absolutely like massive progress, like technology and everything, and like just like the speed at which we've advanced. And then he was ranting and raving about how furious he is that it seems to have stalled in the last 10 years. And then we've started having these kind of like navel gazing nonsense conversations, rehashing over nonsense stuff that we've already sorted out a long time ago. And I think this is kind of an example of that, in that, are we now going back to like, let's spend 5 years all wasting all of our collective energies and time on trying to now redefine what a relationship is, when we already did that ages ago, and we've got bigger things to be worried about right now. I mean, I thought the planet was burning, but now let's spend a load of time on figuring out whether, Mary and Paddy and Jack and Jean can all be in a relationship together, and what that means for tax and inheritance and. What a waste of time.
But the other thing is, do you know that, and like this is something nobody's talked about at all, the word relationships isn't even defined. Everyone's focusing on the durable part, but the word relationships isn't even defined. It's not even defined as romantic relationships. Now, I was thinking about this today. You and I, for example, and indeed me and many other people, and you and many other people, we've known each other for a decade. We're very, very close, as everyone knows. We're really good friends. We are in a durable relationship, you and I.
Yeah.
By the strict definition of the term, a relationship is not automatically defined as romantic in the Constitution. Like, if this referendum passes, we are putting this nonsense phrase into the Constitution that nobody can honestly say what it means. As you said last week, I'm also in a durable relationship with my dog. Like, it hasn't even been, and I said on Twitter today, it was somebody saying, I think it was former Irish Times journalist, was saying, "Oh, this stuff about polygamy is nonsense. It's clearly committed relationships, of two people." And I said, "Well, no, because
Says who?
Then they could have said other durable monogamous relationships. They could have put in extra words if they wanted to limit it or define it. But it's literally unlimited. And if anyone underestimates the ability of courts to define things in the widest possible way, then they've never spent as much as 2 minutes studying the law. It's just beyond. I think that referendum is amongst the most irresponsible things I've ever seen an Irish government propose. And while I think a lot of people think it'll be defeated, it'll be a close run thing if it is.
Because I'm actually quite surprised at the amount of people who are telling me they're voting no, and the different reasons. I think that the 2 Michael McDowell articles that he wrote were catastrophic for these referendums.
Yeah, that's true, but I think there's an awful lot of people who are still captured by the sort of progressive spell of, all the political parties are for this, all the NGOs are for it, the National Women's Council is for it, and they look at and there are a lot of people There are a lot of people in this country who just vote on things based on who's for it and who's against it. And they look around and they'll see poor old David Quinn saying he's opposed to it, and they'll conclude this is another sort of modernizing from Catholicism thing, and they'll vote yes.
But if you're voting yes to have the word woman removed from the Constitution because you honestly believe the dog food you're being fed, which is that it's stopped you as a woman from actually being able to do anything in your life since the moment you were born until today, well then, I don't know what I can say to you. Maybe go and set up a petition to have the Oscars picketed because of Barbie.
Well, this is another thing I think we'll be talking about in the weeks to come. But it feels like every week goes past, I'm flabbergasted.
I know, yeah.
By the irresponsibility of the people running the country. Not even the incompetence, the sheer feckless irresponsibility. And somebody else who's flabbergasted by that is Elon Musk.
This was great, John, though. Come on. This was a coup. I got messages from loads of people saying, oh my God, has Elon Musk actually done an interview with Gript? Somebody said some of them were like, this is amazing. Like, wow, congratulations to everyone at Gript. And then some people who are a bit more on the, mainstream media side were absolutely thumping.
And I got one message from a skeptic who suggested that we had actually done an AI voiceover of pretending it was Elon Musk's voice. And I was like, yes, we are many things, but we're not suicidal.
Yeah.
Because I think that might have come to light when Elon Musk heard about it.
Yeah.
I just have to say full credit to Ben Scallon. He made that happen. I mean, without going into the gory details, he chased that down. He made it happen. There were times when I thought he was wasting his time a little bit, being honest, and I told him so. But Ben is one thing about Ben is he's the most, when he really wants to do something, he perseveres like no one ever.
Yeah, he does.
And there was no stopping him. So it was great. And I thought actually that it was a really important interview because nobody in Ireland had previously heard Musk being able to directly respond to the stuff the Irish government had been saying about him.
Yeah.
And I thought he was very clear, and he has whatever else you might say about him, and I don't agree with him on everything. And I think some of the things he's done X have been great, and some of the things have been frankly regressive.
Luckily, you're really rare, John, in the sense that you're actually able to comprehend talking to and about people that you don't agree with 100% of what they say. What a novel concept in this day and age.
So I did want Ben to ask him about all those porn bots that keep showing up in my feed, but Ben got to that one. But anyway, he is somebody who has genuinely taken a stand for freedom of speech in its most raw and unfiltered form, which is people can say what they think. And a lot of people have said, for example, that has led to an increase in, for example, anti-Semitism on X. And my response to that is good. Not because anti-Semitism is a good thing, or not because racism is a good thing, or not because any of these kind of horrible ideologies that crop up are a good thing.
You're a shill for Israel anyway, as we know.
That is true. That is true. Pocketing the shekels, that's well known. But I think it is instructive to bring these things into the open and see how widespread they are. Because don't pretend that they weren't there before Elon Musk took over X. They've always been there. It's just that you drive them underground and they're festering, and then suddenly when they're let loose, you see how widespread they actually are. So I don't have a particular problem with it, I have to say. Plus,
I mean, I think, but like, this is the thing about about lots of this stuff. I mean, I think that like sunlight kills a lot of stuff, and a lot of people, if they have, that a lot of these views should be, thrown out onto the stoop and let the sunlight shine on it. And I think that like that's important. And if you're in favor of free speech, what gets thrown at you all the time is, well, this, and this, and do you agree with this? It's nothing to do whether I agree with what somebody is saying that I might think is horrible. But like, part of life is that you have to listen to things you don't like. And one of the issues that I have with, the hate speech bill and people always give you these examples, and the examples that they give you are nearly always already covered by existing laws like incitement to hatred. What is the crime that is happening right now that isn't prosecutable that will be under this law? And I've never been able to hear somebody give me a good example.
Very true.
So And by the way, if you're listening and you have one, by all means, send it in, because I'd love to hear, you know, apart from somebody's feelings being hurt, what hate speech, what do these laws cover that 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 will now allow the police to prosecute somebody that should be prosecuted that didn't before. But I think a lot of like first of all, I think that Elon Musk doing an interview on Gript was surprisingly unreported elsewhere. Do you agree?
I couldn't possibly comment. John McManus covered it in today's Irish Times with what I have to say, was a fair dose of salt. He sounded a little bit bitter, I have to say. I don't want to get into all of that, but look, the other news outlets can do what they want. I know how many people listened to that interview. I know the value people took from it. I know how happy people were to hear it. And I have to say as well that the one thing I'm also very proud of is that it wasn't a sycophantic interview. Like, Ben did ask him questions that he put a lot of the concerns of the so-called mainstream to Musk about about the explosion of alleged hate on his platform and misinformation in relation to Ukraine and Gaza and all these things. He put those things to Musk, and we heard his answers.
Yeah, so it wasn't fanboyish. Yeah.
I think it was a really important piece of journalism, and I'm obviously pleased that we got that interview. But the rest of the media can make of it what they will. But yeah, look, I think the more significant thing is that here is somebody who's a very prominent international person in business, one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest man in the world, one of the great innovators in terms of green technology and all the rest of it, saying things that Irish people just don't hear from their so-called leader, like his conviction, for example, that farming should be left alone, that farming is not making any meaningful impact on the global climate, and that it is a waste of time going after farmers. I think it's really important that message, the fact that it's coming from somebody like him, that message be heard. And it simply wouldn't have been heard if it were left to RTE, for example, to report it. So in that sense, I think it was really important to get him on. And yeah, I don't want to talk about it too much because it sounds like I'm bragging, but it was really all Ben, and it was a great moment for the team, I have to say.
Yeah.
Anyway, that reminds me, we do need people to subscribe to us, Sarah, to pay our wages and keep the door open and allow us to keep doing these things, because unlike RTE, the government is not proposing to charge people €15 a month for their broadband to pay for Gript.
So as I said to you when we discussed this earlier on, I know somebody, more than one person, but one person in particular close to me, who for a long period of time, for financial reasons, just didn't have any wireless internet in their house because they couldn't afford the bill. And so I think that there's a kind of a real lack of awareness that €15 a month extra on top of that bill for people is a lot of money.
I am in the relatively privileged position of being able to pay my bills and go on holiday a couple of times a year and so on and so forth. Like a decent middle class life, not a millionaire by even a fraction of the possibility, but I'm more comfortable than an awful lot of people in this country. And when my first reaction when I heard that €15 a month on your broadband bill was, Christ, that's expensive. Like, because I don't know off the top of my head what my broadband bill is every month, but I'm in rural Ireland, so I think it's something like 80 quid or something. And that would have jacked it up to nearly 100 quid a month for broadband. And then to learn that the money was going directly into the pockets of RTE, which I never watch.
But that's the other thing that's really cynical about it, which is that, it's a kind of a sneaky thing, which is, let's pretend we're changing the basic model, but really we've realised that so many of you stopped paying the TV licence in the light of a number of scandals in RTE last year. We can't really do anything about that. We can't send you all to prison. So we'll just change the model so that we can take it without you being able to do anything about it. And I think that that's really cynical. I mean, we hear about, the referendums being described as like, we'll be able to have a conversation about this and a conversation about that. Let's start a conversation. Let's start a real conversation about what the public actually want to pay for in terms of TV license. But no, let's just add €15 onto your wireless. Like, come on.
We should say that the position at the end of the week, this was floated in last week's Sunday Business Post.
Sorry, yeah.
The position at the end of the week now is that the government are not going to do that, and they're going to stick with the TV license for one more year at least. which I think is an admission of defeat on the fact that something like this was just not a political runner. And that, I think, is a demonstration of the weakness of RTE's position with the public and the weakness of the government's position with the public. That
I was also surprised that they actually, like, you know, I don't know if it's a demonstration of arrogance or a demonstration of being completely out of touch, but I was surprised that they were floating that idea publicly in a week where, you know, there is a lot of revelations coming out about the toy show, the cost of the toy show in RTE. Like that, some of that is still kind of rumbling along. Mm-hmm. Like, it's really not the time to be bringing up, you know, how we're going to now. We've noticed you're not paying your TV license here, so we're going to take it off you without you having any say in it. Brilliant.
Yeah,
like, is that bad? Is that bad media, man? Or is that bad kind of political strategy, or is that just we don't care?
It's really hard to say. I mean, the proposal was floated by the Green Party. I mean, basically, there are three options for funding RTE.
Of course it was, John. Of course it was.
Yeah. I probably didn't need to tell people that a terrible idea was floated by the Green Party, but there are three basic options for continuing to fund RTE. Either we stick with the TV license, they abolish the TV license and pay for it out of general funds, or they do this kind of mass levy on something else like your broadband or your iPad or your laptop or whatever. And basically, the non-TV license ones are both terrible ideas, because if you take the money straight from government funds, well, then RTE is you're going to take a couple of $100 million from the health budget and give it to Miriam O'Callaghan, who's a lovely woman, but probably not as valuable as nurses. And then option C is this terrible levy idea where you start charging people who don't even have televisions to fund RTE. So the TV license is the one they're sticking with because it's the least unpalatable option. But then more and more of us aren't paying it. So I don't think RTE is in its current form long for this world.
You could also, do they still do the RTE guide? You could still release the RTE guide and make the RTE guide be €100, and then whoever wants to buy it can buy it and see how much money they get.
That's a really good idea. You should propose that. You should send that up the chain with your Fianna Fáil.
Two of them, €200 later. Yeah.
Like that. Make it $1,000. Make it $1,000. Anyone who's really committed to funding RTE can buy the RTE guide. Or you know what?
Do you really think it's not long for this world? Is that just you really kind of secretly want? Like, are you letting what you want get cloud what you think will happen?
It's a very good question, but I don't think so, because I've thought about this a lot. And the difficulty is the TV license is only going one way, in that you do reach a critical mass where, I mean, and basically, remember, this scandal only broke last August or last July, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Sort of the tail end of the summer. And immediately TV license revenue started to collapse, like by 15% each month. So we've only really had 4 or 5 months of that. There's still a lot of people who haven't gotten the TV license renewal since the scandal broke. And all those people have been reading headlines about how the license has been falling and people aren't paying it as much anymore. And each month, I'm not saying it'll be all of them, or even that it'll continue to be a large proportion of them, but some proportion of them each month will say, well, you know what? Why should I pay it? There are loads of people who aren't paying it now. They can't prosecute us all. Which means the headlines about TV license non-payment will continue to rise, and the government has a problem because you can't prosecute everybody. You physically can't. I mean, look, the courts are clogged as it is. They can't clog up the court with 100,000 TV license non-payment issues.
Yeah.
So I think the fall off in license fee revenue is going to continue this year, at least until we reach July, and they've had a full year since the scandal, because there's still a lot of people who've decided they're not paying it anymore who haven't been asked to renew yet. So I think they are going to be in a continuing difficult position throughout this year. Now we have the news that the government is not going to change the model, at least for the next year, which will make it an election issue. And I'm not entirely convinced that any political party wants to go into the election on a platform of Save RTE.
As platforms go, it doesn't sound like a good one. You're right.
No, it doesn't. Which means that they'll be in a difficult position after the election as well. And so when I say what I said was, I don't think RTE is long for this world. I meant in its current form. So I think there's going to be a major come to Jesus moment with RTE, where they're going to have to ditch Montrose or ditch 2FM or ditch Network 2 or something and consolidate into a much smaller, leaner operation. And that's what makes sense as well, because they were designed for a time when they were the only 2 television channels in the country. People who lived in Ireland had 2 TV channels. Now even somebody who has access to the basic TV package offered on sort of pre-sat has 70 or 80 TV channels that they can access. I think maybe 34. I don't know what it is, 30, 40, something like that.
Yeah.
Plus Netflix, plus Amazon Prime, plus YouTube Premium, plus all these other options for entertainment, plus DVD players, everything. So they're built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And they're demanding to continue to exist as if they still dominate the market, and they don't, and they won't. So yeah, I don't think the future is pretty for RTE, and I won't warn them if I'm right.
Well, what they could do with is a kind of a distraction, because you just said there about elections, and I have a friend who is I think, very good political kind of pundit or political anorak. And this particular friend thinks that there will be a general election on the same day as the local and European elections. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Well, I was talking to a government minister a couple of weeks ago, not a senior one, but a government minister who thought the election will be in September. But that's two pieces of intel there, that we think there'll be an election before the end of this year. It actually,
like, what's the difference between having it in June or having it in September? Really, I mean, it's just a recess in the middle.
Well, it makes it. This is real political anorak stuff now, but I think it actually makes sense to have the general election before the local elections, because a lot of these Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael TDs who lose their seats will want jobs in the Shannon.
Yeah.
But if you lose a load of seats in the general election, and then on the same day you lose a load of councillors, you suddenly may not have the councillors left to elect your defeated TDs to the Shannon. So, if I were the government, I would pitch for a general election sooner rather than later, because they're still kind of treading water in the polls. This is the thing. Sinn Féin have not yet sealed the deal with the public.
I think Sinn Féin have really lost momentum. I think that I don't understand why they've come out and said they're supporting the referendum. I think that they're struggling to carve out a real identity for themselves anymore. I think they've maxed out the support they were going to get, and if anything, it's kind of falling a bit behind. And there's just a momentum that was there that feels gone. It feels very flat. There's
also a huge wedge between them and their base on immigration.
Yes,
or at least a bit, if not their whole base, then a big portion of their base on immigration.
And I think that's hiding in the weeds because you're afraid to come out and have that fight with your base is a terrible idea, and I think that's what they're doing.
And also on this Gaza stuff as well, they have a problem there, because there's obviously a portion of their base that is fanatical about this. And now there's this business of Mary Lou heading off to Washington for St. Patrick's Day to associate with the Zionists. So like which of course people for profit and the other small left wing parties, that's a godsend to them, because they can do the holier than thou thing. So yeah, I think Sinn Féin have far more political problems than the opinion polls might suggest. The other reason why I think the government should hold the general election early is that as of yet, and they may well be in a position a year from now where there's still no sort of populist alternative to them on the other flank. But there definitely isn't one now. So if I was the government, I was advising the government, I was saying, don't wait for such a thing to get organised. Even if it's only barely competent, with the way the public mood is at the moment, there's every possibility that 10 or 12 anti-immigration candidates could take seats in various parts of the country at the moment. And you don't want to give those people time to organise. So if I was advising the government, I would say go at the earliest possible opportunity, sometime in late March or early April. But they're not going to do that. But that's what I would be advising them to do.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I was thinking about like the local and European elections today, and I was looking at the field in Dublin for Europe. And there's no kind of, we'll say, centre-right or a candidate at all. It's a real opening. Fianna Fáil selected Barry Andrews. I think Labour are running Aon O'Riordan, is that correct?
There's like 9 left-wing candidates in the race already.
Yeah.
If you count Claire Daly and Breed Smith and Sinead Gibney from the Social Democrats, and it's apparently, but not confirmed, but likely to run Aon O'Riordan. You name it. There's every brand of left winger is catered for. Kieran Cuff obviously running for the Greens. There's nothing on the opposite flank, which tells me that there's a big opening in the market there. I've said for some time that I think somebody like Niall Boylan, who is, for full disclosure, somebody I know and think highly of, But I think something like Niall Boylan, who jumped in the race, would make huge impact.
That's an inspired idea now. You should ask him.
I am a humble journalist who does not get involved in telling people to run for election. My political days are behind me, but nonetheless, I can do a bit of punditry, and I think somebody like him will be a strong candidate.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've talked about a lot. We've gone through like 6 topics, and you only shouted on one of them. So
it was a good week overall.
Yeah, it was. It was. So we will leave it there. For our listeners who may be exhausted having bounced around those topics. Normally we cover things in a little bit more detail, but there was just so much this week that we wanted to talk about a lot of things. That won't always be the case. Maybe next week will be quiet, but we'll find out. So until then, from Sarah and from me, that was another episode of The Week That Really Was. Thanks so much for listening.